evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's main meeting. So we have for us tonight Leslie Andrews, who's going to talk to us about Azure Data Factory for beginners. Before we jump into that, we do have a user group member who is looking for some assistance in the way of a little bit of consulting hours. So, real brief, medical group in the Triad area, little distance from the triangle, but not too far. Working on some maintenance optimization work, some administrative stuff, possibly database development as well. So a fair variety of tasks, and wanted to know if there was anybody in the area who was interested in some consulting work. So if you are a person interested in that, I can give you some more details. Hit me up via Meetup. If you have my email address, hit me up via email. If you don't have my email address, well, I already said Meetup, so go there and we'll put you in touch. I'll replay this announcement a couple more times, but I did want to offer that out to the community and see if anybody was looking for a bite. Now, I'm going to hand it off to Leslie, who will take it away from here.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Leslie Andrews. I'm here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we are here to talk about Azure Data Factory for beginners. Does it make data? And of course it doesn't make data, but what it does do is it makes your data cool and it lets you do cool stuff with your data. Like I said, my name is Leslie Andrews. I have about 20 years IT experience in government, healthcare, electrical service. I am a speaker. I spoke at Summit in 2020 and Speaker Idle in 19 and 18. I'm an Idera ACE, a certified data engineer, and a certified data analyst. I am a senior consultant with 3 cloud solutions, which acquired Pragmatic Works, where I originally started in November of 2019. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn at landrews5807, and I will try to brighten up your Twitter feed with cool pictures. We are here today to meet these objectives when it comes to Azure Data Factory. When you leave, I'd like you to understand what it is and what it's used for, how you set it up, and then a couple of demos that show how it's used to move the data around, and then a real world example of, a kind of complex situation where we're going to put all those pieces together and show you how you can do something in a production environment using the data factory. So first off, we're going to start with, what is Azure Data Factory? A cloud-based ETL, extract, transform, and load tool, and a data integration service that allows you to create data-driven workflows for orchestrating data movement and transforming data at scale. So that's what it is. What does it do? It lets you move data around. And like I said, transform it and be able to do cool things with it. And you could have some control activities that allow you to do flow of your data workflow processes. This is a sample of some of the ways that you can connect to the data factory and push data out to these same sources. So we've got Teradata, Synapse, Azure SQL Database, file systems, Salesforce, Google, even though we don't like to talk about their cloud stuff, we can still get to it. And how does it do those things? Well, there's the 4 major pieces that you have to have in order to create a data factory pipeline. So we have the pipelines, which is made up of activities. There are tons of activities that you can do, and they're creating more of them every day. Linked services, which is how you connect to the databases. And then the data sets, which is actually the data that we're going to work with in the factory. So visually, when we connect those pieces together, these are how those things fit together. So we have a pipeline, which is where we're going to schedule, monitor, and manage those pieces. And it's a logical grouping of the activities, the things we want to do. We want to copy data. We want to do stored procedures. We want to execute a Databricks notebook or move files around. And that activity consumes and or produces the data sets, the table, the file, whatever it is that we're going to be working with as far as our data goes. So when it comes to the data factory, the thing that actually makes it work is your integration runtime. When you create a data factory, it has a default runtime that's named Auto Resolve Integration Runtime. And this is created on the fly when you start up your factory. It's what executes the data flows, it moves the data, it dispatches and monitors the transformation activities like in Databricks or the machine learning. And it also executes the SSIS integration packages in a managed compute environment. It's created in a default region, but it might be that you need to have a runtime in a specific region. So you can create your own runtime environment. So we have the Azure integration runtime, and you would use that when you're doing cloud-to-cloud exchanges of data. A self-hosted integration runtime when you want to move between the cloud and on-prem. And this actually involves installing another piece of software on the on-prem so that it can connect to and work with the Azure cloud version. And then the Azure SSIS integration runtime when you want to execute SSIS packages through your data factory. So that's a basic understanding of the terms that we're going to talk about, the things that we're going to be building and using and looking at. And so we're going to start looking at some demos. We're done with slides. We are going to be moving on to the portal. So if you're going to be following along, you'll need to have an account and access to the portal at azure.com. Some of the infrastructure that I've set up beforehand in order to do the demos are a couple of subscriptions in Azure. I have my personal subscription, Leslie Andrews Consulting Enterprises, LACE. And I have a SQL server on that has two databases, a LACE demo, and then the Stack Overflow source. So pretend that would be a transactional system that, again, is outside of your company's subscription, right? Because sometimes we need to be able to get data from outside of our organization. And then I have in my 3 cloud subscription, which is my MSDN, an Azure SQL Server, which has a copy of AdventureWorks on it. And then I have a Synapse instance where I've created a data warehouse for the Stack Overflow tables that we have. And then I've also created a storage account, which is where the Blob Storage and the files are going to go when we're doing the extracts to that. So I've got 3 demos that I'm going to go through. The first one just kind of is basic Azure Data Factory, how you create it, the things that you have to know, and then a basic transformation of data from the SQL Server to an Azure SQL database. And then another one that goes from the Azure SQL database to Blob Storage. And then a real world example that puts all of those pieces together. So we're going to come over here to the portal. Hopefully I'm zoomed in enough so that everybody can see this. But we're going to come to portal.azure.com. I've signed into this as my 3 cloud solutions subscription. I'm going to go to create a resource, and I'm going to look for Data Factory. Like most Azure services, you have to have a subscription, a resource group. You can create a new one or use an existing one, a region, a name, and a version. The next thing that we have to do in the Data Factory is configure Git. So because Data Factory is a web service, it doesn't actually save files on your desktop or in a local folder somewhere so that you can have work in progress type of situation. So with Data Factory, you can create a pipeline and run it in the debugger, which is in basically the local session that you're running in your browser, or you can publish it up to the service and run it. But you can't really do much in between. There is no saving unless you have your Data Factory integrated to GitHub. You have to have a GitHub account and you have to have a repository already set up for the Data Factory to connect to. So that's why it's telling us here that we have to have the repository, the account, the name, the branch name, the root folder, and those are all required things. For this particular demo, we're not going to do any of that. So we're going to check this little configure Git later button and not have to worry about that. But just so that you know, if you're going to start doing your own development stuff and you want to be able to have different versions or test out different things and see how they work and be able to Control Z and go back to what you had before, there is no Control Z once you've published. You're published, you get the new version that's out there, and that's it. Networking, we're going to leave these with the defaults. We're going to connect via a public endpoint. We're not going to change the auto-resolve integration runtime to be provisioned on demand. We are not going to set up any additional encryption. So we can see here that we can set this up to encrypt using a customer managed key and in a key vault. So that kind of lets us as consultants or people that are building things for other people let their security in so it's pretty kind of like I would say a two-factor authentication type thing. So once your customer revokes your access, they still can have it and have access to their Data Factory. Tags, just like all Azure resources, you can tag things and be able to track your resource allocations or spending. And then we go through the review and create. And of course, it's not going to because I didn't fill out everything. But what happens when it's done is it takes you to the Data Factory. And here we go. We've created a Data Factory. This one is called ADF 3 Cloud Demo. Doesn't really like, why is that so weird? The Zoom got weird there, sorry. All right, here we go. So Data Factory, these are all of the things that we can look at in this overview. So we have our activity log. This will show us, the last 6 hours. That is true. Last 24 hours. It will show us the activity that's happened in the last 24 hours. We've created some pipeline runs, some debug sessions. We updated the pipeline. We created some runs. We can use access control for allowing access to the resource using role-based assignments. Again, if we had any tags, we could add those here. Azure has great tools at being able to diagnose and solve problems that you might be able to find, not just on your Data Factory, but any of your resources. We have our networking, which we set up with public endpoints. The properties for our Data Factory, the resource ID, any locks, the quick start guide, any alerts that we've set up for monitoring, diagnostics, metrics, logs. But the only thing was, wait, we had talked about needing pipelines and data sets, and none of that is here. Well, that's because this is the overview of your actual factory. This isn't where we haven't walked in the door yet. To walk in the door to the factory, we have to push the author and monitor button. And when we do that, it opens up the actual Data Factory. What's great about this home page, the landing page in the factory, is it's full of videos and tutorials that really do a great job of showing you some of the things that you can do with the data factory. So we've got introductions, we've got lift and shift your SSIS packages. So if you're trying to get rid of your on-prem SQL Server and moving to the cloud, but you have a whole bunch of SSIS packages, there's processes that allow you to just move those up to the cloud using Databricks within Data Factory. So these are some great resources right here in the landing page. There's some real simple tutorial walkthroughs for creating a pipeline or a data flow that you can get to. I'm going to start at the bottom of our little side of options here in the Manage section. So here are the linked services. If you're used to or coming from SSIS, this is the synonym for your connections. So in SSIS, you would have your connections to the databases or the files or whatever it is that you are trying to connect to. Linked services is the same thing in Data Factory. It tells us what type of connection it is. So I've got one to my Blob Storage, the 2 SQL databases, the SQL Server, and my Synapse instance. And then it shows you how many jobs or data sets use these linked services. A couple of the other things that we have in the Manage are the integration runtime. So as we talked about before, we have our auto resolve integration runtime. It's currently running, which is good. There is a Purview preview. So if you've done any work with Purview, you can connect that to your data factory for the data lineage, and these types of modifications and transformations will show up there. If you do finally go in and get set up, here's where you would come to add that configuration to your data factory. And if y'all use ARM, the Azure Resource Manager templates, those can be imported and exported for your data factory here. Triggers are the data factory SQL Server agent job. So in SSIS, we would configure SQL Server agent jobs to go out and run our packages. This is kind of where you would do that in Data Factory. You create a trigger that would start your job at a particular time or your pipelines when you want to run. And another pretty cool thing are the global parameters. So these are constant across your entire data factory. So if you have different data factories that your organization runs and you need to be able to know which one performed a job, you could have that parameter, and it would be something that you could use in any of your jobs to track information or log. And then again, some security, the customer managed key, if you need to add those, and if you change to a private endpoint. So that's all done here in the managed section. And of course, the most important thing is to have some linked services so that we can go and do the other pieces. So now we'll go look at those other pieces. So the next thing that you do after you get a linked service is create a data set to it. You can have data sets that are, let me push this button real quick. So the integration runtime was running, but the interactive authoring wasn't turned on. And this is what lets you be able to preview your data in the databases or see what the tables are to select from. So this particular linked service goes to a specific table. Other ones, the Synapse, it says it failed, but it really didn't. There is no table here because I'm using parameters on the job that uses this connection to pass in a table name. So you don't always have to have all of the information filled in for your linked service. On this particular one, on my Blob Storage, I have one that's very specific about the file path that it goes, whereas on this one, I'm using parameters to pull that information in and passing it through. So there's a lot of really advanced techniques that you can use to use parameters to drive this from a configuration table or different scenarios for passing data around. So the first thing that I'm going to show you here is copying from Azure to my personal process or database server, my LACE server. So as you can see you see the zoom doesn't work very well on this because it's all like little layout things. So there's a little blue dotted line going around the work area that I'm in. And if I come down here to the bottom and I pull this up, this is where I can add parameters to the pipeline. So when I've got the blue outline on it, I'm on the pipeline. Whereas if I click on this actual object, these are the properties and requirements to fill in for copying the data. So we have a name, we have a timeout period, retry intervals. Your source, of course, is the source of the data that you're trying to extract. For this is from the AdventureWorks database. So this is out on my SQL server. I'm going to get the sales order detail and I'm going to copy it to my personal server. So if we come out here, here's my LACE server. Here's my LACE demo. And here's that one table. And if we select from that table, we got nothing. So if we come out and we actually trigger the pipeline, got our sync. It's telling us that the LACE demo is the sync data set. If we open that, we can see that it's going to a specific table. You can see up here at the top, it's given me little tabs of all of the things that I've opened so we can navigate back through to the things that we're looking at. So we've gone through to the LACE demo so we could see that that's going to that one particular table. So if I debug this, it's just going to run it locally in the browser. But if I add the trigger and do a trigger now, it's actually running it in the data factory on the server. So now we can click the little monitor button here and we can go and we can see that this pipeline is in progress. It was triggered manually, tells us how long it's been running, when it started. There are two ways that you can cancel a pipeline. If you just push cancel and there are children pipelines, those children pipelines don't end. You have to push the cancel recursive so that it cancels the children pipelines that may have also been spawned from the pipeline that you're running. Oh, no, don't be like this. Oh, see, earlier it ran so quickly. This makes me so sad that it's queued up. All right, so we'll just keep talking. So eventually, we're going to have data in our SQL Server over here. Yay, see, there it is. We have our 542 rows, which is all the data that's out there, which of course is not very much. Data Factory is really good at moving lots of data, but I want it to be fast, so we're doing really small data sets for this. So because yeah, you don't want your demo to take a really long time. So it told us it succeeded, and it took 1 minute and 5 seconds. So that's pretty slick. All we had to do, seriously, was take one of these, drag it over here, pop in our source data set with a query, our sync data set with a table, and it moved all that data for us. Some of the other activities that we have are Data Explorer. We can call an Azure function. We can do a couple of different things with Databricks. In our general, we have execute a pipeline. So if you have a process where you've built a pipeline and you want another pipeline to invoke it, pulling an SSIS package, doing a lookup or a stored procedure, and using variables. And for each, and switch. Those are two that we're going to use later. But these are the types of things that you can do. This one was pretty straightforward and pretty simple. We went from one database to another. Sometimes, however, you can't go directly to an Azure database or somewhere in the cloud. You have to put the data somewhere. In this particular instance, we're going to put the data in a blob storage. So we have a demo container out here. There we go. And I'm actually going to, I think it's this one. Nope, not that one. It is this one. Oh, nope, I was ready to use this one. So I'm going to delete this one real quick. And when we come and run our demo, it's going to create that again. So again, if we come and we look at our source is the top 10 users from the Stack Overflow. I tried to make sure that when I was moving stuff around, I used different schemas so that it would be easier to visually trigger, oh, this is in a different schema now, so it must be in a different database. So this is coming from the Stack Overflow users database. Again, this is on, which server is this on? This is on one of mine. So this is on a Lace server. And the sink for it is the Parquet Blob Storage user. So if we come out here, it's going to put it daily extract SO user. I'm going to trigger this now. And again, this is when you can't go directly to another database. This is kind of a contrived example because you wouldn't do this with an Azure database for most situations. But for us, we're working with a DB2. And the only way that we can get the data out is to run a query and put it in blob storage somewhere so that then our cloud process can pick it up from there and do something else with it. And so if we come back over here and check the monitor, let that finish up. So it might be that for your situation, having it go out to a blob storage system is what you need the data to do so that you can get it somewhere so that you can move it somewhere else. We finished. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. Now we got our little succeed. So if we come back out here to the blob storage and refresh this, we can see right here that this file was made at 5 o'clock on 5/18. Right, so put it in the daily extract folder. Are there any questions so far? Are we doing good?
So there are a few questions.
Okay, great. What do we got?
First one is, if I wanted to connect to Amazon Marketplace Web Services, would that be a linked service?
Yes. So let's see, let's go.
Yep, it's right there, the first one.
Yep, Amazon Web Service. So the first thing that you would do is create the linked service to it. And then you have to create a data set that gets the data that you want from that connection. So for the linked service, it would go to the Amazon Marketplace. And I don't have any of this stuff, right? Whatever it is that it wants you to do here, your endpoint, your marketplace ID. I'm sure if you're doing this, that you're familiar with what these things want, right? And then it would show up here, and then we would come over and author a data set. So we would say new data set, tell it that the data set is a marketplace service, and then it's going to want us to create one. So here, If we had an Amazon Marketplace linked service, it would show up here. And then we could connect to a specific table. If you didn't want to put a table in, you could pass that in through a parameter at some other point in time. But yep, that's how you would do that.
Yep, that also
Does that
answers the
answer the
next
question?
question. Sorry.
Great. Okay.
Also answers the next question of whether Azure makes it easy with a wizard to set up a linked service. The answer is yes.
Yes, yes, it does. Azure tries to make everything easy with a wizard.
Next question is, what is the difference between a data copy and a data flow?
I'll talk about data flows in just a minute. So give me a little while and we'll get into the data flows. But it's a different thing.
Sounds good. And
Okay.
if anybody has any other questions, now's a really good time to type them in. So there's about a 10 to 20 second delay between when you say stuff and when the wider world gets to hear you about it.
Okay.
So what I normally do is try to vamp during this time for about 20, 30 seconds. That way people have an opportunity to type in their questions, and then we don't move on. It's like, oh, wait, now somebody did get a question in. So I have been prodding chat a little bit to see, poking chat and saying, hey, you got questions? You got questions? So I think we may be all questioned out at the moment.
Okay. All right. So, excuse me. Swallowed something wrong. My water. All right. So I'll go ahead and talk about data flows real quick then before I move on to the last demo. Data flows are more like SSIS being able to build a custom data set. So if we were to come in and build a data flow, it's going to let us add a source like the user's data set. So if I wanted to, it's going to make me do the little wizard thing here. Select the Stack Overflow users, right? So if I come down here and I connect this Stack Overflow users data set, and let's say that I have another linked service to my payroll system, and I want to find all of my users that are not employees. So don't want to send my employees the same stuff that I send my regular users. In here, in a data flow, I could bring in my users and I could bring in my employees, and then I could mush those together and do a union to just get, or an intersection to just get the ones that are both, or the ones that are neither, right? So what is it? Union, intersection, and exclude, right? Exclude, is that it? Anyway, so, but that's, and then you would end up with your own data set within the data factory that you could use, that's the users that are not employees, or employees that are users, or employees that are not users, right? So it's allowing you to shmoo those two things together more than because you can't do that with these data sets. All of the data sets that we're getting in the factory, they're just that thing that's coming from, you can pass in a table name and you can bring back a different table to manipulate within that data set in your processes, but you can't change anything. You can't do computed columns. You can't, nothing. You get what you get in the query or the table. Does that answer the question on data flows?
I'm going to go with a yes.
All right.
If there are follow-up questions, I'll hit you about them later.
Okay. Additionally, we have Power Query in preview. So down here on the side, we can see that. And the Power Query is like data wrangling. And it used to be part of data flow, but now it's its own thing. And basically what it does is it takes the data flow that you've created and it converts it to M, so that then it can be executed in a Spark environment and scaled. And so that's the Power Query is just a converted data flow, and a data flow is a fancy data set that you've created yourself. All right. So now we're going to go on to the third demo, which is the real world example. So what we've got here is a process where every day we have to go out and get all of the new stuff that happened in our source system. And it could be usually in situations like this that your tables are either very, very big or they're not so big. So you can do two things with it. You can either do a incremental load, or you can do a snapshot. So for a small table, you could just give me everything that you've got every day and load it over into your data warehouse. And so every day when you run the process, you get the history. So if anybody happened to change something from last week, you get that change because you get a snapshot of the table every time. Other tables might be too big to do that. If you've got 20 billion records, there's no way that in a single day you can migrate that amount of data over every day to keep it in sync. And so in this particular scenario, we're going to get every day's data. We're going to capture a watermark date in a configuration table that tells us, oh, the badges table, which is incremental, was last loaded on 5/16. So when we run that job today, we can go, oh, okay, go out to the badges table and find me all the days that are after 5/16. And it comes back and it says, oh, there's 2 days, 5/17 and 5/18. So then we can pass those two dates into another query that says, okay, go get me all of the records from 5/17 and go get me all of the records from 5/18. And then I can run a stored procedure and I can transform them, do whatever I need to do with that stage data and load it into a final table. That doesn't account for changes to previous days, right? It's not an upsert. This is just a straight insert of new records on a daily basis. You can write processes that will do an upsert that goes back and it looks for changes, does a slowly changing dimension, type 2 changes. You can work stored procedures that do all of that, but that's not what this is. This is a snapshot or insert new records. That's it. So this particular stored procedure that we're passing in is set up so that if you have multiple groups, so you have 4 or 5 different groups that you need to process, and they have different source schemas and table names. You can have a single configuration table that drives multiple processes. And you only want to bring back the tables that have the isActive flag equal to true. We don't want to be processing tables that we're not using anymore. So this one is actually filtering out a couple of tables. So real quick, before we go on with that, I want to come over and show you in the Synapse instance, in the Stack Overflow, that, let me refresh this. There are, oh, let's drop these. So in my data warehouse, so I'm on my Synapse instance here, I have the data warehouse tables that I've created that match the Stack Overflow tables. So some of the stuff that you have to do is manual. So you could, if you wanted to, write scripts that went out to your operational tables. Maybe you do in-house development. You could have a script that says, oh, go out to the systems tables and see if there's any new tables. And if there are new tables, create them in our data warehouse. Right? There's all sorts of cool things that you can do to build that. So I've got my data warehouse tables out here. I have my helper key column. So this is the table that I talked about that has the watermark dates. So I have 4 incremental tables here. It has the watermark date and then the field that it increments on, right? So we have to know what field are we going to go look at in that table to see if there's anything new. So you have to do a little bit of investigation to figure out which is the best date. There might be multiple dates in there. And in fact, I did. I had to go and figure out which one was going to be the best date for some of these. And then this table listing. Here's the table that I was talking about that has a couple of them. The users table is not active, and the post table is not active. So when we run our process, these two tables aren't going to get any data in them. But if we come back over here and we look at our data warehouse and we run it, we can see that we have no records anywhere. So this is going to get that list of tables, and then it's going to do a for each loop. It's going to look at each of the tables in there, and it's going to determine whether or not it is a snapshot load, the 0, or the incremental load, the 1. So in my, oops, come back. There we go. So I've put in the description that the switch is based on the snapshot, and then there's the 2 activities. If it's a 0, it's going to do this activity, which is execute the snapshot pipeline. So we can go through to this. I double-clicked on that, and it opens up this snapshot pipeline. We could have also gotten to it from over here. But what this is going to do is it's going to extract to the storage, the blob storage, and then it's going to run a stored procedure to load that into Synapse. It's not a very complicated stored procedure because for the snapshot, it's basically just a picture of it. But what this one's doing is it's adding in the schemas. So I have the staging and the data warehouse. If the staging table is null, then create it as a copy of the production or the full table, truncate it, and then I'm going to insert into that staging table from the existing table. Not really a staging table in this situation. What it is, though, is a snapshot of the production table before we made our changes. Maybe you need to be able to go back and prove that you did the right thing. So if you have a snapshot of the days before you made your changes and today's, then you can use that for troubleshooting. I have one process where it's running that keep a copy for a long time because they keep saying, why is this like this? I can tell you exactly why, because I have all of the history that I need to recreate everything that's happened. Maybe you need to keep it every day. Depends on your situation. I will tell you this is not best practice. You do not really want to embed your secret. You want to use a key vault. I'm going to go change my secret as soon as we're done with this. So this isn't going to work after this presentation, but this is how you run your query and get your data from the blob storage into a table. Now, this syntax copy into from the file, I believe only works on Synapse. If you want to be able to use the Parquet table or files on blob storage on a SQL Server instead of the Synapse, you can do that, and it's really cool by using these external tables. You can map a new external table to that file structure. So out here, we can come out here, we could have a badges folder and a whole bunch of files in there, and you can create an external table to that folder and query it just like a table. So while this copy into to get into the Synapse is cool, just being able to load stuff into the blob storage and use the external tables with the Polybase, that's pretty slick too. So then we're going to do some dynamic SQL and replace our staging and full table names that we've put up here with our variables, and then it's going to execute those, create our tables, and do that. However, if it is the incremental pipeline, it's got to do a little bit more. Like I talked about, right? First, we have to get the incremental query. We have to get those unique set of dates that we're going to do. Then we're going to do a for each loop for each of those dates. So if we look at this activity, This one is the extract to source to storage. Again, we're using some parameters from the job to dynamically create the query using the outputs from the other activities. So activity get incremental query. So it's going back and looking at that activity that we had earlier in the pipeline, and it's getting the first row output, that incremental field, right? So that creation date or that date, where it is greater or equal to the date that we found. So this is all very parameter driven. It figures out the days. It knows what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to come out here and I'm actually going to delete our, oops, not clone, cancel, delete. I will tell you, it really bothers me that the trash can is right here, because it's really easy to accidentally click the trash can when you're trying to do it. You got to cancel, then you have to close it without publishing so that you don't actually save the fact that you got rid of your query. So go back to the orchestrator. Going to go ahead and trigger this now. So while that's running, did we have any questions about this whole process and what it's doing or how it's doing it?
Well, there is a question here about using Azure Data Factory as a component in a data ops environment.
You can ask it. I don't know that I'll know the answer though.
Well, that was the question. Right?
Oh,
If
okay.
you, for example, if you've used it as part of data ops.
I have not. We have like a whole team that does DevOps stuff, and I'm not on that team.
That's fair, but to give my take on it, yes, it can definitely be used as part of data ops. Think of it
Okay.
as moving data around between environments. It's not necessarily so much for I'm going to, for example, store some data in source control, store my reference data in there, and deploy it out a lot. So, in that regard, if you're thinking of it strictly from DevOps perspective, you may have more luck with other types of technologies, but as part of I need to migrate data between environments, I need to have solid, repeatable processes for deploying data, then absolutely.
So while this stored procedure is pretty vanilla and doesn't do a whole lot, the actual stored procedure that we're using in our production environment is a lot more beefier. So one of the things that you can do that is really powerful in Synapse is the create table as, the CTAS. And when you are trying to do things with tables, sometimes it's easier just to take, in this situation, take the staging table and rename it to the production name, and take the production one and rename it something else. So you're doing a lot of swapping back and forth between the two tables. This particular one starts off with right. So we have placeholders here for columns, and then we're creating an upsert table. And we need to be able to, in our situation, know, like, change the data types, right? So we have a whole bunch that's going on in here that goes out to the sysobjects and schemas and columns to be able to figure out, well, what is the current state of this table? Is it, what's the distribution policy? If the data type coming in is a date time 2, then we're going to change it to this concatenation, right? So it does a whole lot of work to figure out what the table is supposed to do. And then it gets to the very end, and again, it does the replace with the columns and the names and the upserts. We do a little check to make sure that we get rows before we actually do the swap. We rename the tables, we rebuild the indexes. If there were any keys on the table, they get recreated. So there's some really complex stuff that you can do inside the stored procedure to support the distribution or the changes that you're making in your data. Oh, look, it succeeded. So yay, so we can come over here, we can run, we have data in all of our tables except for the two. If we refresh this, we can see that it created all of our staging tables. And if we look at our keys, we can see that it updated the watermark date for the 3 days. We have our file out here that we can see. So for each of the snapshots, it just creates a direct file right here. That's the name of the table. For the incrementals, we have a folder that shows the day and then the 3 days worth of data that it got, the 29th, the 30th, and the 31st. I found yesterday, so if I run this again at 6 o'clock, it'll have 5:19 on the days for the folders because it's UTC. I'm like, oh, that's handy to know. I got to make sure that I don't run it at 5 p.m. and then at 6 p.m. because it'll look like I did it over 2 days. So, but we actually use a pattern, very similar to this with the incremental loads and the snapshot loads for this production job that we run to keep the database in sync while we wait to do the migration. So, all righty. So here's an overview of that process that we just did, right? So we got a list of the tables, type of process to invoke, a snapshot or an incremental. A funny thing too, in our production system that does this, there's actually 2 snapshot loads and 2 incremental loads because some of the queries need to be, they can't just be, select the field names from. We have to get a Unicode query. We have to like nvarchar everything in it to convert like funky characters and stuff. So we actually have 4 switches that we do depending on whether or not it has to have the funky character query or just the regular query. Then we have the watermarking. We do our ETL. We use those stored procedures to get the data the way that we want them. And then we can publish it out for Power BI, Tableau, whatever reporting tool we're using to do our analytics with. Again, there's my email, landrews@3cloudsolutions.com. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you very much for coming this evening. I hope you've learned something. And I still have our little sales blurby thing here too. So if you do have any questions, we got lots of people who know even more than I do.
How is that possible?
I know. I don't know. You know more than I do.
All right. Well, so chat, what you got for questions? I don't know. Do we have any questions? We're gonna find out as we're waiting for them to get some questions in. Stare at these fun icons. Looks like so far no questions, but actually, yep, okay. I did not miss any questions. Here we go.
I hope everybody learned something.
I believe so. So, what are some costs to look out for?
Ooh.
Are there any components that tend to be really expensive that you don't think about up front?
So I've used like $10 today doing my 2 demos. I'm not moving a whole lot of data. Um, if we come back over here and look at my pipelines, I have run a lot of them. Um, it is nice to see that, failed, 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 failed. Ooh, succeeded, succeeded. Less fails. So I, I also really made sure that I'm using very small boxes because I didn't want to have to pay a lot. Like I said, the 3 cloud is on my MSDN subscription, but the other one's my personal. So I didn't want to run up a whole lot of costs on my own stuff too. But yeah, absolutely. The storage costs, the processing costs, that's how Azure makes money. And I haven't gone, oh God, I should not do that. But now I do for the Synapse instance. If you're not careful, man, it will suck all your money dry in a day. I think they've
easily.
gotten better at that. I think they've gotten better at that though, because I didn't pause it this time and it didn't use up all of my money. So, but yeah, Synapse, you got to make sure that you pause that instance when you're not using it, or it'll suck you dry.
Yep. Dedicated SQL pool pricing has gone down a lot, but even at the low end, you're still talking $1 or $2 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've
I'll
got
be
some.
pausing all of these and shutting this down until the next time I have to do this.
Exactly. We've got some really good questions that have just burst into chat, so great
Okay.
job here. Any gotchas in using the product?
I haven't found any, no. Everything has been pretty straightforward. User error, right? You type in base URL, but then you go URL base somewhere else, right? And takes you an hour to figure out that the words are reversed. But I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to those types of things. But no, it's really straightforward. The drag and drop interface is really easy to use. Yeah, I've been working with this product for about I'd say 6 months now, and really feel like I've gotten into where I can really start to do some cool things with it. But then I'm like looking at like one of my coworkers, he's the one that helped me find the stupid URL base thing. He does his table configuration a little bit differently, where some of the database name and the connection information is in that config table instead, and it's even more parameterized and can be a little bit more dynamic to go out to different systems and be a little bit more robust. And so I'm excited to sit down with him and take a look at how to do some of those more advanced things with the functions and variables, and make it better.
Sure.
It's always one of those things you go back and look at the thing you built a year ago or 2 years ago and go, oh my God, I didn't know a single thing about what I was doing. Why did I do it like that?
That's true. So, how would you recommend migrating from, say, a dev environment to other environments?
Ooh, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that, because you're right. I don't know. I don't. That's just not anything that I've had to look into. So I'd have to go
Fair enough.
figure that out.
My recollection is that Data Factory version 1 was all JSON based. So what you would normally do is you'd take the JSON stored in source control, and then you could use that essentially to deploy out to your other environments. Not sure
Okay.
about V2.
Oh, so I bet it's like here you can export this data factory as an ARM template. I bet that's what you
There you go.
do.
Yep,
I bet
that
you
makes.
export it and then you import it into your dev, into your prod.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. So, uh, use ARM
Yes.
templates, save them in source control. The ARM templates are idempotent, so you can rerun them, and it'll just synchronize your dev environment with whatever, and then you could deploy it to your prod environment. So yeah, it makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. So that's how we think you would do that.
Next question. Would Git enablement change your demo? And if so, in what ways?
Uh, no, it wouldn't, because I'm not actually creating and saving and doing the actual pipeline development. All I'm doing is running them. Even if I had Git enabled, you would still run the jobs by pushing that trigger. It would just allow you to, so let's say I come over, I'm not sharing anymore. If you create a new pipeline, it has like a publish now, and you can't, you can run it in dev, but you can't really run it in the factory until you publish it. But that wouldn't change whether I had the GitHub installed or not. I mean, that you still have to. That's just so that you can save it in the middle.
Okay. Uh, Next question here. Does Data Factory automate the pause and unpause on the compute, or is there any capability in Data Factory to do that?
I I don't know. I know that so when I came in and I did the enable the interactive authoring, so this actually turns off after an hour of inactivity. But I
By the way,
don't
if
know
you're
that.
pointing to something on your screen,
Oh, I
you're not
am.
sharing.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I'm not sharing. In the linked service, when you want to see, I had to check that little box to interactive authoring. That terminates, but I don't know if the actual service stops. But I don't think that Data Factory charges you unless you're actually moving stuff.
Yeah, Data Factory doesn't, but I think the question was more of, say, your dedicated SQL pool in Azure Synapse Analytics.
Oh, yeah, they'll charge you for sure.
Yeah, so
Yes.
is there maybe a way to unpause it, perform your data load, and pause it
Yes.
again?
Yes, you can absolutely. Yes, that can all be scheduled in Synapse. Yes. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. You can auto scale. It's auto scaling. That's what that is.
Okay. And do you benefit from running these tools at different hours of the day? I guess maybe that's around cost. Like, does it cost different amounts of money at different times, sort of like spot instances? If
I
I'm
don't
wrong,
think
the Duke,
so.
hit me up, let me know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's the same cost regardless of the time.
Yeah, I think about the only thing that is priced differently based on time of day in Azure is virtual machine spot instances. And even that's really uncommon. I mean, that's a lot more common in the AWS world, but in Azure, they really push the you pay one price.
Yeah.
I'm 2 for 2 on question clarifications, doing a lot
Awesome.
better than normal. Oh, those are some really good questions. Does anybody have
Yeah.
any others?
Awesome.
Yep, sounds like we might have hit all the questions. One of these days, I'm gonna get smart and be like, "Hey, chat, if you have a question, instead of waiting all the time to type it out, just have a little, hey, I have a question, vamp for me, and then type it." But uh, one of these days, maybe I'll recommend that. Barking
There you
dog, does
go.
he bite?
Yeah, I had the barking dog just happen. So, well, I
Yep.
want to
So
thank you again for inviting me. I hope everybody enjoyed my session. This, like I said, brand new encore presentation today. So this is only the second time this has been seen in public. I hope it was okay and that you enjoyed it.
it was great. thank you very much. We definitely appreciate you coming out remotely and giving a talk that's essentially brand new.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
All
sounds
right.
great. And
Thank you so
with
much.
that,
Yes.
of
Yes.
course, of course. With that, we're going to wrap up this evening. So thanks again, everybody who stopped by in chat, and we hope to see you again soon. On Thursday, special edition, Thomas Grosser is going to be talking to us about scaling SQL Server beyond 2 CPUs. So stay tuned for that. It was something that he presented at 8KB and is guaranteed to be more depth than you might
Man,
want.
those 8 people are just like the nerdiest nerds of us all. I'm like, they are so deep into the internals of SQL Server. I'm like, I don't even know how to get to there.
That's true. I work with two of them. They are deep in this.
They are. So that sounds super exciting.
Indeed it is. And so we'll see everyone on Thursday. And then next Tuesday, we've got Shabnam Watson, who's going to give a BI related presentation for us. All the details are in Meetup, meetup.com/trypass. And we'll see you again
Shadnan's
soon.
awesome too. Bye.